Okay, Organization of the Year. I feel much more comfortable holding a camera being in the background than I do being here, but I pretty much begged to be the person to be here to talk about Flagstaff Shelter Services. I've been blessed to spend 33 years in this community, documenting what you all do, getting to meet you all, getting to look into the work that you do, the organizations that you're in, the volunteer work, the professional work, and it's all amazing, it's all humbling, but the time that I've spent documenting the staff of Flagstaff Shelter Services has been life-changing for me and transformative. I've got a speech written down, or I've got notes written down. I think I'm going to wing it. So, be warned, you're in for trouble. So, Flagstaff Shelter Services. I think when many of us think of people who are experiencing housing insecurity, when we think of people who are homeless, it's all too easy to think of people who are suffering mental health crises. It's all too easy to think of people who are suffering from addiction crisis, whether that's alcohol or drugs. And so we think we have an image in our mind, and I'm making a sweeping generalization, but my experience in talking to people as a journalist is all too often that's what comes to their mind, is a street alcoholic, is a crazy person acting out. And the time that I have been lucky enough to spend at our shelter in Flagstaff, I learned something really quite different. I learned that in a town where home ownership for young people coming up, for people already established, for people with families, is more an American fantasy than an American dream. In a town where rent prices are very quickly almost out of reach as a mortgage would be. Many people who consider themselves established, many people who are living a productive life and are committed to our community are one disaster, one paycheck away from experiencing housing insecurity. And that can start by living in a car, that can start by living on someone's couch, that can, that pathway is an incredibly easy one that so many people can find themselves on. So the work that Flagstaff Shelter Services does is hugely impactful. It addresses a need in our community, and a particular, almost becoming psychotic passion of mine right now is the fact that this is done by an independent organization. This is the work of our community, this is the work of our community agencies that is not done by the city of Flagstaff. I mean, I pause for a second. That is not done by the city of Flagstaff. This is not city employees. This is a private organization. This is not done by Coconino County. Despite this being a public health crisis, this is work that's not done by the Coconino County Health Department. And in fact, when the time comes for funding, this organization does not have a line item in either the city or the county's budget that says every year we are going to make this a priority to fund this. So that means that each year, funding is a year-by-year basis. It's something that's fought for, that's scrambled between public funds, private donations, between state funding, possibly city funding, possibly county funding. I spent a lot of time yelling at elected officials who I eat dinner with when during the middle of COVID, I was watching a game of hot potato with who would pay funding for some of the things that Flagstaff Shelter Services was doing to keep people in our community safe. And there was a lot of talk, there were a lot of promises, there was a lot of invective, but when it came to writing checks, that potato got thrown around an awful lot. So one thing that I've talked a lot about during COVID and since COVID is what Flagstaff Shelter Services did during COVID. And in particular, what Ross Schaefer did during COVID, and what the board of Flagstaff Shelter Services supported her in doing. At the time that COVID was ravaging the world, was ravaging this country in particular, and people were dying en masse, 70 miles north of here on the Navajo and Hopi reservations, families who were living in multi-generational congregate living were being decimated by this virus. Ross Altenbar realized that she had a congregate living situation where each night 200 people were sleeping less than 3 feet apart in bunk beds. And what we had hailed 3 or 4 years before, when an addition was built to the shelter to enable more people to be sheltered at night, what had been hailed as a great resource for our community suddenly became a great danger to those people who were being sheltered. And when the greatest solution was having people sleep head to toe, like that they were at a 5th grade sleepover, something had to be done, something had to be changed. And so, with no idea of where the funding was going to come from, at a time when our city was shut down, when our hotels were empty, Ross came up with a plan to hotel the clients of Flagstaff Shelter Services. When we were washing our groceries on the tailgate of our vehicles because we didn't know how COVID was transmitted before we brought them into our home, Ross found a way, and the board of Flagstaff Shelter Services and the staff of Flagstaff Shelter Services found a way to give these members of our community the dignity, the respect, and the ability to isolate in the way that we all were. And when I was documenting that for the newspaper, I was in the shelter and I was talking to people, and coming full circle back to that, who the clients of Flagstaff Shelter Services are. I talked to a woman who was really excited. She had just got a job at Sam's Club, and she was going to be one of the people who handed out food samples. And she was really excited. It was a source of income. It was part of her pathway to housing. And all I thought about was, wow, she's going to be right in the middle of the community. And when little Jimmy wants to run over and grab a Tostino roll, this lady who's living in a congregate living situation is the person who's doing that for our community, for our families. I talked to a Navajo gentleman who was a drywall contractor. He had a home, he had a family, he lived on the reservation, but he didn't have the money to run 2 households. So he didn't have an apartment in Flagstaff, and when he came to work in Flagstaff, he relied on the shelter as a place to stay, because if it wasn't for the shelter, he'd be camping in the woods while he worked in our homes hanging sheetrock. I talked to 2 other gentlemen who worked at restaurants packing up. I mean, you remember those times where we couldn't go out to eat, so everybody was ordering food and having delivery because that was the safest. And these 2 gentlemen were working in 2 different restaurants packing food to come to our homes and to enable us to be safe. Again, living in a congregate living situation. So I've been telling anybody who'll listen, and you're a captive audience, that, you know, the story of Flagstaff Shelter Services could be optioned to Hollywood. And I mean, you know, the elevator pitch for that screenplay, for that story, is that there are people in this room who, without the work of Flagstaff Shelter Services in protecting our community, you know, all the focus is on, oh, Flagstaff Shelter Services works with homeless people. But Flagstaff Shelter Service serves our community, and the work that they did during COVID protected our community. There are people in this room who are alive eating a chicken lunch right now, who without that work, without that intervention, would be tucked in an expensive box 6 feet under the turf at Citizen Cemetery. Without a doubt, there are people in this room who wouldn't be among us. That's huge. And that's just one story of one event that happened and the work that Flagstaff Shelter Services did. But it's as much as I keep talking about it, we've mentioned it in our newspaper, but I think most of the community is completely unaware. And so the one thing that I would say to all of you, you're all leaders in our community. You're all the people that are listened to in our community. Make life uncomfortable for our elected officials. I certainly am. I texted councillors at budget retreat right now. I texted the mayor and a couple of council members this morning and said, hey, guess what? I'm presenting an award to Flagstaff Shelter Services for Organization of the Year today at lunchtime while you're on your budget retreat. Despite me asking you pointedly during a forum for candidates if you would make it a priority to put line item budgeting for Flagstaff Shelter Services, they still don't have a budget. They still don't have money from you. So I call on all of you to have conversations with city council members and the mayor, with the supervisors on the board of supervisors, and ask them that question and tell them it's an expectation. There are legal things that cities and counties have to fund. Apparently, people facing housing insecurity are not one of those legal things, but it's a moral thing. And Flagstaff Shelter Services does the moral work of our community. And so it's, it's just huge to see them receive this award, to see them here, to see the work that Ross does, to see the work that Chuck does every night as the manager of the shelter. When I first came to Flagstaff, I worked for Chuck 30 years ago. And my role in the community, I see it for me, what I tell my kids, is I have the best job in the world. I get to meet people in the community and I get to be inspired by them and I get to have them inform how I live my life. And every day I'm inspired by Chuck, by what you do. Every day, Ross, I'm inspired by the challenges that you overcome. And it's not a happy group of people. In a state that doesn't fund mental health and that closed institutions to help people with mental health and just sent people back to the community, Flagstaff Shelter Services is working with a population of people who are struggling. The same is true with addiction. Addiction has been in my family. I lost my son to addiction. It's insane, the strength, the fortitude every day that the people at Flagstaff Shelter Services bring to their work and bring to the service of our community. And we all owe them an enormous debt of gratitude because we don't see what happens. We don't see that work, but it serves every member of our community. So it's with great pleasure that I am honored and humbled to announce it's already been announced, to welcome them up and to say, come, let me escape from this microphone. Flagstaff Shelter Services.